Haere mai, ki tēnei hui. It's good to be here. I have alerted the team presenting today that councillors have been quite distracted with some other matters of late, and so our engagement with the report may not be where we would all ideally like it to be. So there is going to be a presentation. I just wanted to let you know that this session is being live streamed and is public. So I think I'm going straight to Margot. And welcome to our guests, Helen and Dougal as well, who'll be presenting. And so there'll be presentation and questions as part of this session. Over to you, Margot.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, kia ora, good morning, councillors. So as you are aware, WCC, we've been working with 9 other councils in the Wellington region to investigate the possibility of a joint water services delivery model. The purpose of today's briefing is to provide you with the opportunity to ask questions of Dougal and Helen here from the Joint Project Team, along with us, your officers, in relation to the recommended approach that's outlined in the report that has been shared with you. So as Chair mentioned, today we've got Dougal List with us and also Helen Rogers. So they'll be answering the specific questions, and then we can add supplementary answers as needed. So I will leave it to Dougal and Helen to work through the 9 other councils and the ways of working that we have in place under the MOU. But you also may recall that in the briefing that we gave recently that we outlined that officers are exploring several options, so the regional approach is one option. So we will be bringing those options and that analysis back to you with advice on to help you make your decisions to shortlist the options to take out to public consultation early 2025. So whilst today we'll be focusing on the regional option, it is just one. What I would like to just say is the thinking may not be as developed as needed to answer some of your more detailed questions. So please, if there are questions that you've got that we're not able to answer right now, we will take those questions away. We will come back to you as soon as we can, or at least commit to you a timeline of when we'll get that information to you, because your questions may also help us with that analysis we're doing. Very quickly, the other thing as well, anticipating if you may have questions on the LGFA, we have Sarah Houston-Eastergaard who is online with us, so Sarah may be dropping in and out of the screen with us to answer some of your specific questions. Okay. Look, I will now hand over to Dougal and Helen to take you through a brief presentation, then we'll drop into Q&A. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors, and thanks for the opportunity to come along and have this session with you today. I've been working with the 10 councils over the last 6 months to facilitate a process to look at how we respond to Government's Local Water Done Well program, and particularly opportunities to work together across the region on a joint water services plan and potential establishment of a joint water services organisation. So we've got just a few slides to talk through today. And the idea is we'll kind of come to questions at the end. But what we wanted to particularly cover was the points around the legislative requirements for reform, how the regional model was developed, the process for that, key elements of the model, including governance and accountability, financial sustainability, how we'd respond to those particular tests of the legislation, the benefits of the model, and the next steps in this process from here. So just a quick recap on the legislation, and I know you're all very aware of this, but I guess just the key point to make is councils must develop a water services delivery plan, and you must develop that and have that submitted to the Secretary by 3rd of September next year. So this is going to require quite a quick process for councils, and as Margot says, at times it will mean that you're moving forward with perhaps not the level of detail that you'd otherwise normally have or would like. The legislative requirements also bring in a new set of regulatory frameworks for economic regulation and changes to the role of taumata arawai. So it means we're dealing with a situation where there is no status quo. So even if council is minded to remain with a Wellington water delivery model, Wellington Water will need to respond to the new regulatory framework as well. It's not the same framework. And the big change really is the economic regulation, which will focus on price and quality to make sure that councils are delivering levels of service and have the funding to deliver on that level of service. The legislation which has been enacted, which particularly sets out the requirements of the water services deliveries plans, will be built upon later this year with the enduring settings, as DIA describes it, which will include setting out the new water services delivery model. So we're expecting that third bill to land in December and be enacted by April, May next year. And that will bring in some of the final provisions around how the government gives effect to local water done well, including more detail around economic regulation and how that will happen in practice. The regional model was really kicked off. As a region, we've got a history of working really well together on a number of issues. And in order to get ahead of legislation that we knew that was coming and the challenging timeframes, councils decided to work together, and you may recall you signed an MOU back in May this year to work together with other councils to really look at how you could respond to this new policy settings and the need to look at water reform. And so the objective that we've worked towards over the past 6 months is to provide sufficient information to councils to understand the opportunities for developing a joint water services plan and the potential establishment of a water services organisation. So the work that we've done, it's not a water services plan, it's not an investment plan, it's not a price plan, so it's not at that level of detail, but it is intended to provide you with sufficient information in order that you are confident that you can move forward. And as Margaret says, you'll have decisions brought to you later in the year. So the report, and I appreciate you probably have had a chance to delve into the 200-odd pages of report which has been circulated. The report is built upon what are the legislative requirements, what are the key requirements from councils, what does success look like, what are you looking to achieve as a region, what are the drivers for change and the scope of the challenge, what's the level of investment that's needed across the region, analysis of different delivery models, governance, accountability, financial sustainability, and also implementation considerations. So if you kind of compare it to a business case process, it's a kind of a strategic and indicative business case. We're not at that detailed business case stages yet. That's the next phase of work as we move into a water services plan. Working with the Advisory Oversight Group, which Mayor Whānau was a member of course, we identified a key goal for the region as per that up there, but it was really to deliver safe, reliable, environmentally and financially sustainable water services so the region can be resilient, restore te manawa te wai, and enable new homes and wellbeing of communities. It's quite a long goal, but it kind of recognises that water is a really important life-giving property for the region and really important to our social and economic well-being. And so the process was developed working with the advisory group across the 10 councils, with the CE group, including Barbara. It's been a non-binding collaborative process. Councils were free to exit at any point, and that was supported by a joint project team and joint officer group, so that we're kind of working together with one version towards really trying to identify what's the best option as a region. So as Margaret says, each council has a number of options. This is intended to provide advice on what would be the best option should you be minded to work together as a region. The key requirements that councils set were really important in terms of providing that kind of North Star of what's important to you and other stakeholders and partners. And so we tried to use these as a framework for guiding the direction of the option that was developed. So, consumers, what do they want? And this is just a bit of a subset, but they want public ownership, they need water to be affordable, and they need good local service. Our iwi Māori partners, looking for te manawa te wai, meaningful influence in terms of governance and accountability, and that treaty obligations continue to be honoured. Councils really looking for that financial sustainability, local influence, including around growth planning. So, you've got a range of other outcomes that water supports and enables, including growth, making sure you've still got that influence to enable those to occur. And there's clear accountabilities and levels of service as well. The government's got a set of clear minimum requirements, particularly around financial sustainability, which will apply to all councils. And then the future entity, if we're going to set up a new entity, it needs to be set up for success. We've all learned from the journey that Wellington Water's been on, and as you're aware, Wellington Water's been subject to several reviews. How do we learn from that? How do we make sure that we're setting something up to be successful, that is empowered to do its job right from the start? Really important part of the principles. The need for change, we did do quite a lot of work around the need for change and the level of investment that's required, so that's quite a significant subject of the look, all councils in our region face significant issues around water. They're not the same issues, they do differ from council to council, but in totality and for all of our councils, transformational reform is required, and that this has been confirmed through decades of work and reports and reviews. This is not our work alone. This has been an issue which has been on the table, as you're aware, for years. But some of those issues outlined there, a substantial portion of our network is actually worn out and needs replacing, and that's why we have leaks, which are hard to chase down. There is constraints to growth in the region. We simply don't have enough capacity in our network to enable growth in many parts of the region. There will be new regulatory standards and compliance requirements that councils need to respond to. We're facing summer drinking water shortages. We're losing 45% of our water. These are issues that you're familiar with. And in Wellington City, you've got a backlog of renewals. You've got challenges with capacity for growth. You've got compliance issues with Moa Point and Karori. You've got issues with water quality going to streams in the harbour, and of course leaks. There's a range of issues. So without dwelling too much on that, as you'll be aware, there's significant investment that's required across the network. Different issues for each council, but all councils have issues. Looking at that as a summary of the network across the region, in a sustainable infrastructure network, you'd have around a third of your network in excellent condition, around a third in medium condition, and around a third in kind of average condition. And you're constantly renewing networks to make sure that they are sustainable. And that means you kind of get your network into a position where that's the least cost model because you're keeping it in a sustainable state. In our region, about 21% of the network is worn out. So that needs to be fixed. And at the same time, we have to have investment to maintain the network, to increase our compliance requirements, and to chase down faults as well. So if you use the analogy of a car, we've got a car in our region that needs 3 new tyres. It's got some rust spots, a crack in the windscreen, and it's leaking oil. When you have a new car or a better conditioned car, you don't have all these maintenance issues to deal with. In our instance, we've got the costs of running a car, and we've got the costs of maintaining a car, meaning the overall cost is higher at the moment. In terms of responding to those issues, we looked at a number of different delivery options, delivery model options, and DIA's also put out guidance around this recently, which is quite well aligned with the different options we looked at. So obviously we have options of in-house delivery models, and some of our councils, Kapiti, Horowhenua, Marsden and Carterton, this is their current state model. A joint CCO type model, similar to Wellington Water type model, an asset owning CCO, so it's that full breadth of service and asset ownership, consumer trust and private sector. The recommended model is that middle one, an asset owning CCO, and that's really well aligned with the DIA guidance that's come out recently as well in terms of those different model options, in terms of the recommended options for the region. In terms of what that looks like, the idea is that this would be a full breadth asset owning water utility, which was vested with the ownership of all regional water assets, and therefore also the revenues and liabilities associated with those as well. As I say, this is well aligned with the government legislative requirements, and particularly what we're expecting through Bill 3. It's an organisation that would be well placed to respond to changing regulatory requirements, can have the ability to focus on assurance, quality, delivery and local value for money, and local service as well, which means you can respond to those issues of compliance and response times. It's a model which would enable financial sustainability by 2028, which is a key requirement of the legislation, and that links to the new LGFA funding opportunities that we've got. But as Margo says, councils also need to consider other options in terms of considering this relative to this model. Just to talk a little bit more about different elements of the model, we've tried to outline in the report how the model responds to different aspects of stakeholders, governance, strategy and accountability. So in terms of councils and ownership, this will be a publicly owned through council, so it would retain public ownership, a really important base principle. Those ownership rights would be confirmed through constitution and shareholder rights, so that's some of the detail that we still need to work through, and some of the powers and functions will also be confirmed through Bill 3. In terms of governance, it really does need to be empowered to operate independently, so that means a skills-based board. It's not a representative board that we're recommending a skills-based board. This is really important in terms of that accountability and independence to make decisions. And this is partly what's going to be expected by the LGFA in terms of those funding requirements as well. So it will need a set of really good core skills, commercial skills, asset management skills, understanding of local government, iwi Māori, understanding customer and local knowledge. It's going to have to be a top flight board, really, very important. In terms of iwi Māori, again, a range of rights and influence will need to be confirmed through those establishment documents, but it's really important in terms of treaty obligations are honoured, that there is meaningful influence through that governance structure as well. The customer is really important in this model, and it's a fundamental shift. I just want to kind of really highlight that a lot of the customer representation is through you, through the council currently. The shift here that we're talking about is that the new entity will have that customer relationship, will own that customer relationship. So they'll bill the customer, they'll provide services to the customer, they'll respond to customer complaints. And a big change that happens as well with economic regulation is that the economic regulator really is focused on that price quality that is delivered to customers as well. So it's a fundamental shift in terms of the council's role from being customer responsible to the new organisation is accountable for that relationship, and there will be oversight from the regulators to make sure that they're doing a good job as well. In terms of strategy, you still would have a very important role as shareholders in terms of setting that statement of expectations, and the water services entity would need to respond with a statement of intent and a water services strategy and a report through an annual planning process, so that accountability framework does remain there as well. The accountabilities and the statutory obligations will be set through Bill 3, we expect, and would be confirmed through the Constitution and shareholders' rights. And there would be that oversight from Taumata Arawai, from the economic regulator and from the environmental regulators, the regional council as well. And the borrowing aspects, as you'll be aware through the new LGFA announcements, we expect that the organisation, at least initially, will be borrowing through the LGFA, which will provide oversight of its financial sustainability as well, and making sure that it's meeting those obligations around financing. An important principle here is that councils will need to provide contingent liability or guarantee of the debt of the organisation that you are the owners of. So that's just an important consideration there as well. Financial sustainability is a really important part of the new government framework, and essentially what this requires is demonstration that you are investing the right amount. So that's the investment sufficiency, demonstrating that you've got sufficient revenue to cover that investment and that you've got sufficient financing to support that investment as well. So this is really where the government will be looking really hard at water services plan. Are you investing the right amount, and can you fund that through price and debt? So they're interrelated. Just first on investment sufficiency, again, we've done quite a lot of work on the scale of the issues, which gives us a good understanding of the level of investment that is likely to be required over the next 20 to 25 years. So this is not an investment plan though, and this is not a price plan, so we're not at that level of detail of having any assurance on what investment and price will look like, because that's subject to a lot of further work around the actual investment and capital requirements and how you fund and finance. Our estimates are that over the next 20 to 25 years, around $15 to $17 billion of investment is going to be needed across the region. And that means an average of $700 to $750 million a year. So it's a ramping up from what we're doing at the moment, and that will need to be done gradually to make sure the industry has capacity to deal with that. And that's made up of a combination of of your basic keeping up with the network. So this is your renewals that you need to keep on doing, as well as catching up with the backlog of renewals as well. So when you add those on top, it's a bit of a doubling of an effect. You also need to enable growth and ensure compliance and fix faults. So that gives you a bit of a picture of a potential investment strategy. And as I say, it's not intended as an investment plan or a price plan, but just to give an indication of the level of investment which we think is required.
It's just Wellington.
No, this is the whole region, Tim. Yep. In terms of responding to that, I'd say that there will need to be a very careful balance between how you price for this so that it's done in an affordable way and how you use finance. And the new LGFA financing arrangements really provide some very powerful tools for a water services entity, which will have this much higher debt headroom than what councils have currently got. The issue we've got is that people aren't charged the full cost of water services at the moment. So what people pay is below the full cost of what it costs to provide sustainable water services. So prices will need to rise over time, so it needs to be done in a sustainable way. So we need to use both price increases and financing in a very careful way to make sure that that is maintained in an affordable way for our community. Economic regulation is a really important part of making sure that that's fair, transparent, equitable and affordable. So it's one of those key principles that we're working with, is that the economic regulator will work with the new CCO to set a price plan and an investment plan in a way which is fair and transparent and affordable. And that the new organisation will use that debt provision from the LGFA to balance how it uses finance with price to make sure that that is as affordable pathway as possible. A key principle that is also really important is that every council we talk to says, but we don't want to pay for someone else's problems. So it has to be based on a cost to serve. So if the cost to serve in Wellington is X and the cost to serve in Kapiti is Y, you're not cross-subsidising each other's problems. There will need to be a degree of harmonisation of prices. We've got about 200 price points across the entire region at the moment. But how that will be done needs to be worked through, again, with the economic regulator. The key principle is it's based on cost to serve. So if the costs in your part of the region are X, that's what you pay. You don't pay Y if those are significantly different in a different part of the region. This is a key issue for our councils around the region. Looking at the model and potential benefits, we think there's a number of key benefits. We think it's really well aligned with the government direction and policy framework and with council key requirements. Keeps that public ownership, provides a clear accountability framework for the new organisation so that the community can continue to hold it to account. And through that investment, you can replace part of the network and also make sure you're responding to those key issues like enabling new houses and growth. Resilience reduces the rates burden on councils and communities through that pathway to financial sustainability. So I think there's a number of benefits associated with this model. The next steps in our process will depend on council decisions, but we will need to continue to make progress on this pathway if we're going to meet that September deadline next year. And so effectively we're working on two key outputs. One is the Water Services Delivery Plan, which has a lot of focus on information disclosure and how you achieve financial sustainability, and a degree of information around what's your delivery model, how will that be set up. As councils, you're going to need more information than that around the implementation as well, so we see that being supplemented by a more detailed implementation plan, which will flesh out some of those really important details around governance, around the change process, around principles of debt and asset transfer, local service delivery model, etc. So there's a lot of work to work through both of those pieces of work, and as I say, we need to work through a process which enables confidence and public consultation on that as well. That'll also need to look at a number of specific issues. So as Margo noted, the timing of consultation, and if this is a joint model, how we do that across a number of councils in a consistent way. Stormwater is an area where we need to do some further work to look at the optimal arrangements and how that aligns with the intended legislation. The financing arrangements, we're in discussions with LGFA around how that would work, including the timing and debt transfer processes. and that it will need to pick up council debt and the timing, the principles and the quantum from councils as well. We still haven't got Bill 3, so that'll come in December. That'll kind of provide another part of the jigsaw as well. And then we're dealing with people, so this is a change process as well. It'll particularly affect our Wellington Water staff, but also potentially staff across councils as well. So there's a number of aspects to work through there. In terms of next steps, really by the end of the year, as Margaret outlined, you'll receive advice from your officers around options and choices and how those are weighed up, and particularly around what you're going to take into public consultation. We anticipate public consultation will need to obviously align with any LTP processes Wellington City runs, but also happen sooner rather than later in 2025 to enable decisions to be made on preferred delivery model and the completion of the water services delivery plan. Council needs to adopt the water services delivery plan. Your chief executive has to certify it. So there is a degree of formality around this process as well, and then that has to be submitted to the Secretary of Local Government by 3rd of September 2025. So a few issues to work through there. Thank you, Chair.
All right, we'll go to questions. The first one from Councillor Pannett.
Thank you for all your work on this, much appreciated. I guess my main question is how this is actually going to be different. I appreciate there's the stuff around the asset ownership, but we've got the same people and it's roughly the same sort of structure. So I guess I'm just trying to understand that. And also customer, why are we using that language? Because people don't have a choice. They can't switch to another operator. So just those two questions for now, then I'll go back on the list.
Yeah, how different this looks will depend a little bit on which councils choose to be part of a regional model or not. So we've got 10 councils potentially part of this model currently. Obviously there's 6 councils in the Wellington Water model. This is fundamentally different from Wellington Water in that Wellington Water is effectively your delivery organisation. It is not in control of its of the investment program. It's not in control of the assets. It doesn't have that direct customer relationship as well. So it's a shift to what we're proposing is a shift to a new organisation which would have that end-to-end accountability of assets to customer, financing, delivery. It enables an organisation to take a longer-term view and to use particularly the new financing arrangements to make sure that it's thinking about how to invest in the network over the longer term in a way which really responds to both that price and quality. And I think that goes to the point around the customer. You're right, it's a monopoly situation that we're dealing with here. That's where the economic regulation, again, is really, really important. The economic regulator will have a focus on both price and quality, and that's how it can really drive to make sure that there is good local service delivery at an affordable price as well.
So how do we maintain accountability apart from the SOI? Is that the only mechanism?
So councils will have quite a different role in this. In order for an organisation to be successful, it does really need to have the mandate and independence to do its job, but that does also need to recognise that there are owners to the organisation. So under the framework that we're proposing, there would be some form of ownership committee which would get to make appointments to the board, would get to set the statement of intent letter, and also would have oversight of that reporting in terms of the annual plan. Your role is quite different though, and it's remembering that the council's role is also supported by the regulators' roles, particularly the economic regulator, but also Taumata Arawai and the regional council. So the new organisation will have a number of organisations that provide oversight and governance control over it, and well, not governance control so much, but oversight of its performance, particularly around price quality, water quality, and environmental impacts.
Councillor McNulty.
Kia ora, thank you for coming in today. Per the Chair's comments, things may be asking some things that have been covered, but I just want to double check. I guess firstly, probably for Sarah, if Wellington Porirua Hut Upper Hutt and Greater Wellington come together, which I understand is feeling more likely. What's the LGFA debt to revenue option in that scenario?
Kia ora, councillors. Under that scenario, the covenants with the LGFA would need to be negotiated by the new entity with an upper limit of 500% debt to revenue as the potential, as opposed to the 280% that they would have as individual councils.
Okay, so potentially up to 500, great. I think I read this somewhere. How's Greater Wellington's role being handled as the supply of water? I feel like I read something about they would step back from the entity after a period of time.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. So Greater Wellington has evolved its position during this process, should we say. They do see that they have a conflict between their role as environmental regulator and supplier of bulk water, which over time they would like to exit from so they can focus on their accountability around environmental regulator. They have substantial assets that they are stewards of, and so the latest position that we've had from Greater Wellington is that they would over time likely exit from an ownership role on a new water services entity, but are likely to remain in that ownership role during the establishment period to give them the confidence that the new organisation can deliver on its accountabilities, and then at that point could potentially exit. It does raise a interesting question of how the shareholder agreement would allow for entry and exit rights, and whether or not councils would be minded to say we want basically a review point in 5 years' time where there is an opportunity for shareholders to reconfirm their entry or exit, and that might provide an opportunity for new entrants to join or councils like Greater Wellington to exit.
Okay, and last one, I guess, Margot. So is it quite likely our consultation pass looking like we have to do the status quo being Wellington Water, even though no one wants the status quo, but I understand that's just a quirk of the legislation that we're different. That alternative one would be regional, and then we may have a second alternative of go it alone. Is that possibly more likely what Wellington City would be looking at getting towards?
Possibly. So you're right. So status quo, so it's the enhanced status quo. So as Dougal mentioned, that it's today's current state plus the new regulations that are coming in. And then, but under legislation, we need to consult on status quo and the preferred new model, right? You can consult on other models. So what we're working through at the moment, excuse me, are what are the options. So a go alone is an option. It could be going in with one or two other councils. At this stage, the conversations with other councils don't signal that that is a feasible option. So we'll be bringing those to you in December for you to shortlist. So we don't have a preferred model at the moment. We don't have a preferred option. We are genuinely working through that. Yeah.
So we just have status quo and alternative one is to be determined.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Just a question about the governance structure. The diagram you showed on one of the slides shows the councils and iwi having arrows here, this one, into both the board and what's the second arrow about? What are we doing down there?
Through you, Chair. The reality is, in practice, both councils and iwi Māori will have a number of interrelationships with the operation of the organisation. Your planning teams, for example, will have a operational relationship. Your infrastructure teams, roading, parks would have an interrelationship. So there will be a number of layers from councils to a water services organisation. Likewise, from iwi Māori, we've looked at the water care model as an example here, where it's effectively a zipper relationship at multiple levels from the water services organisation to both councils and iwi partners, reflecting both the governance influence role and also operational and delivery and planning alignment role.
Thanks. And the other question I've got is about the Commerce Commission. At the moment, is the Commerce Commission doing, I mean, is there any definition about the regulatory regime that, I think you mentioned that they are looking at price and quality, but is there a piece of legislation that actually sets out what they're going to be regulating and how they're going to go about it?
So not at this point. We don't have that detail. We're expecting more detail as part of Bill 3. So there has been some policy announcements from DIA in relation to this, but it's being led out of MB, of course, as well, the ComCom work. So we are expecting more detail. So what we're expecting is that it'll be a staged process, particularly the water services plans start with that information disclosure, and then it would build to a process of price and quality. It's quite a different scenario for ComCom to regulate across councils at a council level, as opposed to what was envisaged under the last legislative framework, where you potentially had 10 big entities. But it will certainly be quite a challenge for smaller councils to respond to the level of information that potentially ComCom will require. So I think it's going to be a really interesting pathway of how they move from information disclosure to price quality over time. So,
I don't want to, but you've got the water quality regulator over here. You've got the regional council with, I think you said, environmental regulation. I don't quite understand what that means. And now you're going to have ComCom with also a qualitative. So we're going to have 3 qualitative regulators. Sounds pretty. I mean, that could be a bit messy, right? Yeah. Okay.
All right.
So thanks.
Councillor Young.
So I've got a range of questions. You had a thing of key advantages. Do you have a slide saying key disadvantages?
There are a number of issues to still, well, I don't have a slide on key disadvantages. There's a number of issues still to work through. It's complex working across multiple councils to establish a new organisation, so there's the complexity of the process and the timeframes. There's the costs of establishing a new entity. If we're going to set a new entity up right, it will need the tools and processes and systems and IT platforms to do that right. That comes with substantial cost. There will be a period of establishment and change as well.
You don't have any option?
Well, you don't have any option in terms of doing a water services delivery plan. You need to do one of those. You have options in terms of how you respond in terms of your delivery model. What we're recommending as a best for region is a regional water services entity, but obviously any establishment of a new organisation comes with time, cost, complexity and a degree of change, which you need to work through.
And then you said...
Use your microphone a little bit more, Councillor.
I'll pretend I'm... No, I won't pretend I'm anyone. I couldn't think of a name. You were saying people don't pay the full amount for their water now. Does that include people on meters?
So when I say people don't pay the full cost of water now, generally what people are charged for water doesn't fully cover the costs of providing the services or maintaining the network. And so what we've seen over a period of decade is that the network has gradually degraded. So this is not a new issue. This is something which has happened over multiple decades. And as a result, you've got a difference between what it costs to provide the service in total and what people currently pay. There's also a difference between what people currently pay and what it would cost to remediate the network. So what we're trying to work through is a process where our network is degraded, more money will be required for that. How do we fund that through a combination of price and quality? And once we get the network to a sustainable condition, which will take a period of time, what's the fair and equitable price for providing that services?
I think I'll be dead and buried by then. So just one more question.
Okay.
And that is, so in the UK, they privatised water into companies. Are their structures, is their structure system the same as the structure being proposed over here, or similar, or totally different?
So we're a little bit hesitant to compare to the UK because, as you know, there's been a number of major issues in the UK. There are some similarities in terms of the scale of the organisations and the end-to-end focus, but I think some of the differences as well with the UK, and there's a number of different delivery models there too. It's probably a little bit easier to compare what we're proposing to some of the models in Australia, where you've got end-to-end water services organisations who own the assets and bill customers for those services and work closely with councils.
Thank you.
Councillor Chung.
Great, thank you much. You've already answered two of my questions, so I've just got two here. One comment you made was 45% of the metropolitan drinking water is lost to leaks. Is that increasing? Because I didn't realise it was that high.
That figure would have to be verified by Wellington Water. It does change, and I know a number of councils have managed to reduce the number of active leaks over the past few months, including Wellington City, because of your additional investment. So it does vary from time to time. That figure was drawn from reporting we've had from Wellington Water, but it varies. And what you tend to see in winter months, as well as when the ground is wet, that clogs up the pipes and reduces visible leaks at least. And as you hit drier months, the ground dries out and you see more leaks. So it varies seasonally as well, but that figure is about accurate across the period of a year based on the information we have.
Great, thank you. Second question is, are we self-sufficient in the supply or collection of water? That is, in our reservoirs that we have within Wellington City, is that enough water to be self-sufficient?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. So, as you'll be aware, the water in the Wellington metropolitan area comes from a variety of sources, from Kaitoki, from Wainuiomata, and from the aquifer in the Hutt Valley. There are some ways of how that water is transferred to different parts in the metropolitan area, but generally water to Wellington City, as I understand it, comes from the aquifer. Within your reservoirs, you tend to have, my understanding is around 3 days supply.
Okay. So
Councillor, the questions really should be focused on the regional model for delivery in the report.
Okay, that question was leading up to my question, which I want to ask. If we looked at the option of going on our own, and we don't have sufficient water supply within our own reservoirs in Wellington, which means that we have to take water from the other regions, so does that actually make it more complicated, or do we say that, oh, we use this much water, so therefore we pay you for that much? Or how would that work?
It's a good question, Councillor, and as I alluded to at the beginning, that there may be some questions that we don't have the answers for at this time, and I would say that's one of them. So that's something we will need to include in our thinking when we come back to you for in December.
Councillor Free.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at that, and just a quick one. I assume they're going to bill, this new entity will bill the customers directly, because that's been one of our issues. That will sort out some of the information switchy stuff. So I wondered about the catchments and the role of the catchment in designing the best set of councils to work together in this entity. Has that been considered? Like, how guaranteed is our actual water supply? And how is that going to be controlled and managed?
So it partly goes to Councillor Chung's question as well. The metropolitan councils in particular have got an integrated Three Waters system. So you have an interrelated, particularly water supply network, where water comes from Upper Hutt and the Hutt Valley to supply both of those councils, as well as to Porirua and Wellington City. Wellington City and Porirua obviously share Te Tahi Bay wastewater treatment plant. So there is a high degree of interrelationship between those parts of the network. And therefore the catchment, particularly of the metropolitan councils, there is a kind of a clear catchment. The Wairarapa councils, it's a bit different obviously, and they generally run different systems between the three different councils. There is a small degree of interrelationship of their systems, but not really. So they generally each run, and generally those systems are even different between individual towns in the Wairarapa who have separate wastewater treatment plants. Similarly, Horowhenua has different wastewater treatment plants for each of its towns and doesn't really have an interconnected system for wastewater treatment at least. and Kapiti is not really interdependent with the metropolitan area for its system. So there are some different catchments, but particularly the metropolitan councils, you have a strong degree of interrelationship, and there would be some challenges in.
So my question is, how much does that matter when you're thinking about logical teaming of entities?
So it matters a little bit in terms of there will be some shared assets that councils would collectively intend to invest in, but it doesn't matter absolutely in terms of some of the former groupings of councils span the Cook Strait, for example.
Yeah,
And
crazy.
so a water services organisation can provide services across unconnected networks.
Okay.
It's not a requirement.
Okay.
What really the benefits are of a bigger organisation are scale, efficiency, procurement, capability in order to do work across multiple unconnected networks in a more efficient way.
Yeah, that was Wellington Water's rationale, but it didn't always work well, in my view. The most important question I've asked consistently, but I really want to drill down and get an answer, is the debt. So we have low debt on our water assets because we sold Capital Power to fund the Moa Point treatment plant. We've also invested out of ratepayers' money in things like our new water reservoir to service the hospital, and we're also investing out of a separate levy to fund the sewage treatment plant. How will it be absolutely guaranteed that that investment that's already been made by Wellington ratepayers will be honoured and recognised in a joint model?
Councillor, I can work through that. I can answer that question, and the answer is that we're currently working through that at the moment. We haven't got a finalised position, but we're certainly looking at all of those points that you have raised, and we're looking at that in terms of what level of debt would we like considered by the new water services entity, and what would that necessarily look like, and that will be part of the options that we bring back to you.
So will the debt be ring fenced? So, where the whole idea is you can raise money 500 times the asset value, but how will that be fair? Will there,
under the new water services entity and under a regional model, I don't think the debt would be ring-fenced, and there'll be a really important principle in that, because as the water services entity starts to look at the entire region that it's looking after, it wouldn't necessarily need to be thinking in that way.
But on the other hand, we're talking about each council paying for its own assets to be
and
fixed.
that would be the detail that the water services entity would need to work through.
So I think that it does matter. And I really feel concerned about it.
Yeah, if I may, Councillor, sorry, Andrea. Dougal spoke about a cost to serve model, and some of this thinking will be folded into that cost to serve model and the numbers that sit behind that as well. If that's a helpful insight.
Yeah, and while it's been said that it's being worked on, this is moving at pace. So I really think we're starting to need some answers.
We are working at pace, and it will be brought to you in the advice. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
yeah, I'll need to, I've got some other people with questions, but if you want to go up back on the list. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Kia ora. Thank you for coming in today. Just as a guarantor, will we be required to hold that debt room as a guarantor as well?
Through you, Chair, there are arrangements where we basically it's either uncalled capital or a guarantee that we need to put into the organisation. We do not have to it's early in the morning here, consolidate the debt back onto our balance sheet. So therefore there's no requirement for headroom in a traditional sense from a debt perspective, but that's only if you go with the joint model. If you're a single-owned CCO, then it will get fully consolidated back onto our balance sheet and therefore will impact on our debt to revenue and our headroom.
Great, thank you. And if we are moving the asset of water to another entity, I'm assuming the insurance of the asset will go with it. So what will that mean for our own insurance picture?
Through you, Chair, I think that one's for me as well. So we've done a very high level look. I apologise, my key right-hand person for insurance has been away the last couple of weeks, but we have a standalone insurance policy for our water assets that would lift and shift across to a new entity, and they would become responsible for all of the obligations of owning the assets, including the insurance requirements. The wastewater treatment plants would also go across, so they would be pulled out of our above ground portfolio as well. So there's a little bit of unpicking to do there. In terms of what it does for us back at council, it doesn't shift the dial terribly on our insurance gap or anything like that, because of the way they're insured. I don't want to get too technical on it, but there's the 60-40 rule that only applies to the water assets. And so the benefit of that will also go across to the new entity. So it will be somewhat neutral for us at council.
Okay, thank you. Third question, if that's right, Chair. Operate independently with the ability to prioritise investments. Can I just have some clarity on what this means, as I might take it that the organisation can become an investor in organisations, other projects, from the way that's framed?
Yeah, good question. So the statutory purpose of the organisation we expect will be set through Bill 3, and that will provide some kind of statutory requirements around the role and purpose of the organisation, and I'd expect limitations as well. The economic regulator would obviously also oversee any investment planning or prioritisation by the organisation, and as shareholders you'd get to set direction through the letter of expectations as well. So that all provides a degree of accountability framework to ensure that they don't make poor investment decisions. But the purpose of the organisation is to manage, maintain, deliver safe, clean water. So I'd be very surprised if they were making any investment decisions beyond the bounds of that.
Yes, Councillor Randall.
Thank you. So thank you for helping take us on the journey, and I think all of the stuff you put together is at the right level. But obviously we always want a little bit more before we can be sure. First of all, I just wanted to note this. What is it? How is it that this entity, in terms of cost efficiency, which has been a criticism of Wellington Water, that their procurement is not cost effective. How is this new entity going to drive cost efficiency? Because Wellington Water was set up on terms that scale gave us cost efficiency, and it doesn't seem to have been realised.
If I may, cost efficiency is going to be a really important factor for this new organisation. It's a massive investment program, so every percentage point of efficiency gain we can get is critical. So I really do hear that point. Efficiency can be driven by a number of ways: good governance, good management, procurement processes, strategic planning of how and when you invest. So that you're getting the best out of your investment. I'll give you one simple example is we will have some really big challenging investment decisions to make. Seaview wastewater treatment plant is in the wrong location. Hutt City Council's got some really big challenges with that at the moment. How they choose to invest in that in a strategic way will set the direction of the related network over a period of many decades. So fundamentally, where you get your efficiency gains from a new organisation is you set it up right, give it the mandate and accountability to deliver the right outcomes. But then it's that strategic investment decisions over a period of decades where you really gain your billions and billions of dollars of efficiency gain because you're investing in the right way for the long term. I think that's the big shift. Wellington Water is quite constrained in terms of it's working with 3-year investment cycles, quite short-term contracts. look at longer term successful water organisations, our water networks need to last 100 years. So that's the vision. It's like when you're planning a city, you're looking at the long term. So that's the same kind of frame that we need to be driving for our water investment, and that's where we'll really deliver those bigger efficiency gains.
Okay, I think that's good. I guess the concern I have is the governance model that's been outlined is very similar to the model overall under which Wellington Water has been operating. And it seems to have been the experience of this council that working through this model with the mandate that Wellington Water has and the board sitting between us and the organisation has not delivered the transparency and the accountability that we sought, despite stringent efforts. I guess one of the things I would say is the governance model I think is absolutely critical. And I was wondering in terms of the next round, whether or not a set of options for the governance model could be presented that gives more or less accountability, but still fits within the legal framework that's required. Because I think we're just going to go round on questions if we just have one model presented to us. Is that possible?
Absolutely. We have looked at a number of different options in terms of driving accountability at a high level, but I think the exact kind of issue is where we need to get into in that next phase of work. So how do we define really clearly the shareholders' rights and obligations, the constitution, what exactly is the role and purpose of the organisation under Bill 3, and then from that, be really clear how do we make sure that there is that accountability and the organisation can do the right job in the right way, and you can have confidence in that. So I think it's exactly the kind of issue we need to pick up.
Yeah, and one last question, if I may. It seems to be a principle around this cost to serve, such that councils are assured that the funding that's provided from our water consumers is being spent, reflected back into the service that they're getting. And so can you comment in terms of how this model will still support that Wellington residents as water consumers will still have the accountability of the services delivered to them, because they're going to be charged for the services to be delivered to them through this sort of common, essentially monopoly model?
So this does rely upon some of the future documents and frameworks that a board will be accountable for driving. So the water services strategy, which is kind of what happens after the water services delivery plan is a one-off. After that, the organisation has to develop a water services strategy, which will have to lay out that investment pathway, price and levels of service. And that's something that they'll need to do with oversight from the economic regulator, which they will focus on price and quality. So we are dealing with some future frameworks. We're dealing with a future board. We're dealing with a future legislative framework. We're dealing with future ComCom requirements and a future strategy. So, there are a lot of details that would need to be worked through, but that's exactly the kind of outcome that accountability framework is intended to drive.
Yeah, it's a real elephant of a problem. Can I just go on the list for some smaller questions?
Well, we're actually nearly out of time, so I just wanted to check whether people can stay for another 5 to 10 minutes. All right, but can we please, I'll go for one question each if you can, and if questions and answers, we could keep them relatively snappy. So Councillor Pannett, you're first.
Difficult choice. All right, stormwater. I'll go for that one. So about how it's going to interact with any RMA form, our district plan, any housing regulation, very complex, obviously.
So stormwater is a complex issue, and you'll be aware in Auckland, Watercare is not accountable for stormwater. We will need to work with the proposed legislation under Bill 3, which seems to suggest that councils retain an accountability for water but can still transfer assets and delivery to the new water services entity. So it's a little bit confusing. So it is an area where we need to do some further work, and it's a nut that wasn't really properly cracked under the previous reform package either. But we have some good examples to work from, including how Wellington Water currently operates, where it has service level agreements between itself and councils and other organisations around who maintains assets, who's accountable for assets, and how those interrelate. So you have a park with a wetland, which then leads into a pipe. Who's accountable for each part to that system to deliver the outcome? So I hear you, it's an issue that does need further consideration.
Councillor Young. Great. Deputy Mayor Foon.
Yeah, kia ora. Just probably in my community, the hustle and tussle is around water meters, and I'm concerned this is a big bus going, that the community will not have a chance to understand, just kind of input to what they want there. Can you explain how this process will happen so that I can pass that on to them, please?
So there will be several phases of planning in terms of investment. Obviously, you're making decisions at the moment around water meters and how you choose to invest in those or not through Wellington Water. That direction will need to be picked up as part of the water services delivery plan and then reconfirmed by a new organisation through its water services strategy, which really confirms the investment program. So there are a number of decisions to be made. I guess what I would say is meters are very important in terms of being able to address leaks. So they're not necessarily something you have to have in order to fairly charge for water usage, but if you're committed to chasing down leaks, water meters are an incredibly effective tool to do so.
Councillor Randall.
Yes, Wellington Water, and I think even in your presentation last time in Lower Hutt, outlined the need for better information and better systems. Can you just comment on the value that better systems and information will have in terms of empowering a new water entity?
So a big end-to-end water services utility needs to have a billing system, a customer system, a CRM system. Wellington Water doesn't have any of those at the moment. It needs to have a really effective asset management system. Wellington Water doesn't have that at the moment either. It needs to have that kind of full end-to-end operation so that it can understand what it's billing customers, what level of service they're getting, where are the faults, how much does it cost to fix those, what are the condition of the assets, how does that flow through into the financing information. So these are all components which Wellington Water doesn't have. As you know, Wellington Water's got a bit of a hodgepodge of systems and is currently asking shareholders to consider further investment in your annual plan next year. So whether you stay with the Wellington Water model or go with the new model, Wellington Water is signalling we don't have the IT systems that we need to provide the level of service you're after. We are working closely with Wellington Water to ensure that any investment made into them and their systems would be fit for purpose and not result in any wasted investment, so they could flow into the new organisation as well, though.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Pannett, one last one from you.
Just controlling costs for the customers. What will we be able to do, just given lots of other costs are going up, like insurance?
Really, the fundamental shift here is the additional headroom that a new water organisation would potentially have. So rather than necessarily being constrained in the way that councils are with your current debt headroom, the new water services organisation would have that ability to balance price increases with additional financing opportunities. And so that's the critical difference, really, that Local Water Done Well is trying to address. Because of council borrowing limits, cost increases are basically having to be paid directly onwards through rates, whereas what a new water organisation will be able to better do, we think, is to balance cost increases with financing arrangements as well.
Was that all of yours, Councillor Randall? Okay, great. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of questions. If we have additional questions, you think of something, we go through Margot. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Dougal. Thank you, Helen. Lots to continue talking about. Thank you very much, everyone.